You ever wake up from a dream that was just completely bizarre? You know, like a dream about a dinosaur wearing a tutu, and you just think, where in the world did my brain come up with that? Or what about those moments when something just slips out of your mouth and you're like, I did not mean to say that? Well, all those little mysteries, those tiny little cogs turning in your consciousness, that is exactly what we're going to explore today. Okay, let's dive right into a brief history of psychology.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the ultimate mystery itself. Then we'll get into what psychology actually is. From there, we'll check out the very first schools of thought, unpack the whole Freudian revolution, and finally, see how this field is still changing and evolving every single day.
All right, let's start with the main event, the subject of this entire exploration, that incredible, and let's be honest, sometimes totally baffling thing we call the human mind.
I want to kick things off with a huge question. I mean, think about it. Of everything we've discovered out there in the entire cosmos, what is the single most complex object we've ever come across?
You guessed it, the answer is right there, between your ears. The very brain you're using to think about this question is the most intricate thing we know of, period. The rules that run it are still so mysterious and hard to pin down, but you know what? That has never, ever stopped us from trying to figure it out.
And that's really where psychology comes into the picture. It is the field that is dedicated to tackling all of those personal puzzles. You know, from those weird dreams to Freudian slips, and even the really tough ones, like why we sometimes get stuck in habits we desperately want to break.
So this leads us to a more, formal way of looking at it. What exactly is this science of us? Well, the modern definition is actually pretty simple. Psychology is the science of behavior and mental processes. That's it. It covers everything from, say, why you absent-mindedly tap your foot when you're nervous, to all the complex thoughts and feelings swirling around inside your head while you're doing it.
Now, while psychology as a formal science is pretty new, the questions it asks, they are ancient. Humans have always been fascinated by what's going on up here. I mean, thousands of years ago, Aristotle was thinking about consciousness. Sure, he thought it was in the heart, but the point is he was asking, and you see it pop up throughout history with early forms of personality testing in China or some of the first real descriptions of mental illness from doctors in the medieval Islamic world.
And the field has always been about wrestling with these gigantic questions. I mean, do we actually have free will? What makes people do incredibly good things and also horrible things? What even is consciousness, or this feeling of being a self? These are the huge, profound challenges that psychology dares to take on.
So how did we go from just philosophically pondering all this stuff to doing actual science? Well, that brings us to our next section, and the very first attempts to actually map the mind.
Okay, if there's one date you remember, make it this one, 1879. This is the year a German physician named Wilhelm Wundt set up the very first psychology laboratory. He published the first real psychology textbook, and with that, boom, the scientific study of the mind was officially born.
And right away, this kicked off the first big debate in psychology. On one side, you had structuralism. They were kind of like chemists of the mind, trying to break consciousness down into its basic parts. They were asking, what are the structures of the mind? Then, on the other side, you had functionalism, led by William James. He was inspired by Darwin and thought it was way more interesting to ask, why do we have these thoughts and feelings? What purpose do they serve?
So while those early schools were debating what versus why, another thinker was about to come along and just change everything by taking psychology into the deep, hidden world below our own awareness.
Come on, admit it. When you hear the word psychology, you're probably picturing Sigmund Freud, right? The guy with the beard, the cigar, the couch. He was one of the most influential and, controversial thinkers of his time. And his work really did help shape how we think about everything from childhood to personality to our dreams.
Freud's whole journey kind of started when he saw his colleague, Josef Breuer, treat a patient with something they called the talking cure. The idea was simple, but absolutely profound. The more this patient just talked freely about traumatic things from her past, the better her symptoms got. This was a massive breakthrough, and it changed Freud's path forever.
And that experience? Well, it became the foundation for his entire life's work, psychoanalysis. At the very core of this theory was a truly radical idea, that our personalities are shaped by motives that are unconscious. Basically, Freud was saying that we are all being pushed and pulled around by mental processes we don't even know exist.
And you really can't overstate how huge this was. In 1900, the idea that your own mind was being driven by forces you weren't aware of, well, that was just as strange and hard for people to wrap their heads around as Darwin's theory of evolution. It felt invisible, almost irrational.
But as absolutely monumental as Freud's impact was, the story of psychology did not end with him, not by a long shot. The field just kept growing and changing in some really dramatic ways.
You see, while some of those early competing theories kind of faded away or just evolved, psychoanalysis is still an important concept. But a whole bunch of other thinkers came along to challenge Freud, to build on his work, and to ultimately shape the future of the science.
So the 20th century really became this amazing battleground of ideas. You had behaviorism led by people like B.F. Skinner, who reacted against Freud by saying, forget the unconscious, we can only study what we can see and measure, our behavior. Then, as a response to both of those, humanist psychology came along and focused on our potential for growth. And then finally, the cognitive revolution, with all its new technology, brought the focus right back inside the brain, exploring its internal processes like memory and perception with incredible new tools.
So, what's the big takeaway here? It's that psychology today is an integrative science. It's not about picking one team anymore. Modern psychologists pull insights from all these different perspectives because they know there's no single magic key to the mind. You have to look at it from every possible angle.
You know, the Harvard astronomer Owen Gingerich, a guy who literally spends his life looking into the farthest corners of space, said it best. He said that the human brain is by far the most complex physical object known to us in the entire cosmos.
And what's the most amazing thing of all? Every single one of us gets to have one. It's just knocking around right there inside our own heads, which really just leaves us with one final thought to ponder. What will you do with yours?